Hello and welcome to this, the Crypto Club and Digital Assets weekly catch-up on Zoom. It is Sunday, the 15th September 2024, and as is always the case, we never quite know what we're going to end up talking about. Really depends upon who the audience is and what they want to discuss. Typically, we'll talk about Bitcoin, blockchain, whether that's layer one or layer two solutions. We get to talk about DeFi, NFTs, the metaverse, CBDCs, digital assets, digital asset custody. Lots of other things, really. If you're a beginner and you're just learning about these things, then do come along and join us for a future session. Come along and ask questions. If you're someone who's more experienced, then come and join us one week and tell us all about your project or what you're working on. As I say, we hold these sessions every Sunday evening, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. UK time, and everyone's welcome, whether you're a novice or an expert. We record the sessions, publish them, so if you're unable to make it and you're watching this afterwards, do click on the like, the subscribe, the join and everything. Or even better, come along and join a future session. Anyway, with that, let's see who's going to come and join us today. Hey, Eric, good morning to you. Assuming you're in the West Coast and it's early morning.
Hey Gary, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Where are you today then? West Coast or you're over in
Uh,
Singapore?
London actually.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm headed for Glasgow tonight. I'm taking the sleeper
Okay.
up.
So I see you taking the medication for the trip right now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was
Hey,
having some supper.
Excellent. Well, welcome aboard and welcome to sunny England at the moment. The weather's quite good,
Mm.
so I guess you brought it over with you. That's good.
It's been wonderful. No complaints.
Excellent, great. And we've got MB with us as well. Sorry, MB, I've forgotten your first
Many,
name.
many. Been a
Manny,
few weeks.
hey,
Yeah.
well,
Can you?
welcome back. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was testing my mic and stuff earlier on. So what's actually happening is my mic from my headset isn't working, but luckily the webcam mic is. So I can hear you through my headset, but the actual voice is coming through my webcam. But it's fine. You can hear me loud and clear.
That's the important thing. That's the great thing about technology, isn't it? Well, welcome back anyway. And we're
Yeah,
joined
thanks.
by, is it Gio?
Yeah, that's correct. Hi
Hey,
all.
hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon where you are in the world.
I'm in London actually. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, Gio, not seen the name to that previously, so I guess this is your first time visiting these sessions. So, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I've been around in the group like for quite a long time, but I sometimes can make the on Sundays. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Well, welcome. Is there anything in particular that interests you in this particular area, whether it's crypto or blockchain or whatever? Then.
Yeah, I mean it's always good to know what others people's views and thoughts are in relation with from a regulatory perspective. I'm more, keen to hear your thoughts. Like, what do you think will be the ideal regulatory framework in the UK or like even the EU? Like, what do you think they're doing wrong? Like what will be
Yeah,
um
because there's lots of stuff going on with regulation right now, globally and the UK. I guess the interesting thing, and this is where you have to separate regulation from legislation, and it's a subtle difference. But typically, the way it works in the UK is that the government defines legislation, so the law, and then it's the regulators, which in the UK is typically the FCA, who apply the regulatory framework to support the law. So it's interesting that there's a proposal going through Parliament, I believe, at the moment, this new bill about declaring crypto assets, so digital assets in any form, to be personal property. And you kind of think, well, of course it's personal property, my Bitcoin and my wallet's my own and everything. But it's fascinating that legally, property, from what I recall, there's two types of property. It's kind of like physical property. So, a car, a building, a pencil, or a laptop, or like that, it is physical property. Or there's kind of, I've forgotten what the other sort is now. It might be intellectual property or something. Crypto kind of fell between a crack in some way of, well, if you think about what cryptocurrency is, it's not physical. You might have a ledger wallet or a Trezor or something, but that simply holds the private keys to the actual crypto, not the crypto itself. So what is it that is your property in the crypto world? So there's legislation going through at the moment, so be interested to see where that develops. But then you've got the wider thing, is I guess you kind of alluded to, about the regulatory framework, which is what the FCA is doing. They don't seem particularly crypto friendly yet, shall we say? I don't know whether Eric, you've got perspective from what you've seen going on, of how it compares regulatory wise on crypto treatment, maybe compared to the States, where, what is it, there's 13 state regulators who are all trying to claim domain over crypto, whether it's the SEC, CFTC, and so on.
Yeah, there's I think the SEC was the big elephant in the room straight away, but I think it has greatly lost its feet. It was really just a matter of time before someone challenged it and they went to court and they were found to be naked. And so now it's kind of up for grabs, right? And I think the CFTC is probably what makes the most sense to regulate these things. I think it's most closely connected or akin to a commodity rather than a security.
And it's interesting that this thing that people often don't realize until you get into this space, that the types of regulated financial instruments you can have. And so a security is effectively like a share. It's an ownership in something. Whereas a commodity, you think about oil, gold, coal, something physical, they're all commodities into which you can either physically own them, in which case it's a physical commodity, or you can own a document that represents a right or interest in that commodity, which is what's known as a derivative. And derivatives are really interesting because in the UK, we went through a phase where crypto was not legally kind of controlled by the FCA. In fact, it still isn't, but formally. But derivatives of crypto are, because the UK FCA is responsible for derivatives. So it's kind of wacky. I don't know, Gio, what's your thinking? Do you have any exposure to these areas in terms of knowledge?
Not much. But yeah, it's quite interesting what you mentioned about the new bill and how is the actual view of the new government on crypto, because I haven't seen that much actually. Not sure if you have any more information.
Can I just jump in just 1 second? Basically, I'm just coming to the end of listening to an audio book on Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX, and it's a really interesting story in terms of, obviously he's a US guy, but then some of his operations, like he had an Alameda, which was like a hedge fund, and then FTX, which was a separate entity, and then it was a whole minefield in terms of he was setting up in different locations, just trying to duck and dive the regulations. So because he set up in Hong Kong and then I think he moved to the Bahamas, he managed to get around the sort of US regulators to some degree. So I know that the whole thing is a bit of a complex area. I mean, one thing I have worked out, I'm not an expert by any means in this area, but one thing I realized just from some of my tutorials that I've been going through in terms of building crypto algos, and I'm just following some tutorials that some people have created, is that if you try and access Binance from the UK, you're banned from the main Binance site, but you've got a sort of cut down version, as far as I'm aware. So, and that happens in the US as well, but you can bypass that by using a VPN. So you can kind of get around it, but this is where the whole thing is a bit of a gray area. And if anyone gets a chance, I think it's riveting stuff in terms of listening to the way Sam Bankman-Fried operated, and the way that they sort of navigated the sort of regulatory framework, which, as you say, it was a real grey area, and there was a kind of this catching up game in terms of as he was doing stuff and getting around the US regulators, they were having to play catch up in terms of putting frameworks in place to try and keep up with the crypto guys. So that's just some of the stuff I sort of picked up just from listening to audiobooks, etc.
It's fascinating. So I see you've just been joined by Ken and by Arnold as well. Hey Arnold, not seen you before, I don't think. Good evening or good morning to you.
What's up, Gary? How you doing?
I'm good. Whereabouts are you based, Arnold?
I'm smack in the middle of the UK at the moment.
Okay.
But you don't have a UK accent.
So I thought I'd chime in, see what you guys are doing.
Cool.
We're in the middle.
We're in the middle of England. Sorry, where are you?
Market Harbor.
Market Harbor. Okay. I was not too far away from that part of the world today. So that's good.
I was in Manchester a couple of days ago.
Manchester's north, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah, but I went through that all the way down to London, right? So
depending upon who you speak to, probably anywhere north of the M25 is north of England these days.
The amazing thing is when you talk to people from the US, I mean, I think Texas is like twice the size of England or something. It's like this is a tiny, tiny country compared to the US.
As it was brought home to me, I spoke to some guys from Harley Davidson a few years ago when I was doing some work, and they came up with a quote, which it turns out they'd actually stolen it from someone else, which is that they discovered when visiting England that in England, 100 miles is a long way.
Yeah.
And in America, 100 years is a long time. And anyone who's dealt in the UK and US will understand that. So anyway, Arnold, welcome aboard. Anyway, so what brings you along apart from general interest? Are you into crypto or blockchains or DeFi or metaverse?
I'm just plugging back in, really. Looking at some things in the States. Probably going to head back that way, and digital ID and some digital infrastructure projects. So just seeing what the conversation is.
Cool. I think it was last week we did quite a deep dive into digital identity.
Okay.
Because there was a conference going on in Jordan. It was a defense conference, if I remember correctly. Okay. And one of the people on the call, John, he's very much into digital identity, and I think he was presenting something there around that space. Digital identity I always find fascinating because it's always far more complex than anyone ever realizes until they've spent a year trying to unravel it, thinking, oh, this is easy. It never is.
Nah, and it's the key to owning your own, identity and data and all of that. So it goes all the way back to that, pillar ethos and goals there. So
absolutely, it's cool, excellent. And Ken, how's it going on your side? Oh, Ken.
Yeah, I'm good. Good,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, just coming in to see what the discussion is today.
Well, we've not really gone into anything specific too much yet. Guillaume was asking about perspectives around regulation and kind of like the regulatory friendliness or otherwise, I guess, of the new British government. So for those who aren't familiar with UK stuff, we've had a new government in place for, I guess it's coming on for 2 months or something. It just feels like a lifetime. And it's a different political party. It's the Labour Party as opposed to the previous incumbent and Conservatives. Labour and Conservatives tend to have quite different views. So I guess just like Democrats and Republicans, in some ways, they often have different views. But the Labour Party is not really talking about crypto or financial innovation or anything, whereas the Conservative government were getting quite into the idea of because they tend to be quite close to the City of London, and so finance is part of their kind of like their blood in some ways. They always get interested in new opportunities. So we're just kind of chatting about some of those things, really. And I was mentioning as well, there's a new Act of Parliament in the UK that's going through at the moment. And in fact, just share the quick details for anyone who's interested. It is called what do we call the Property Brackets Digital Assets, etc. Bill. What an unusual name for a bill. So for those who don't know, in the UK, the way new laws come into place is that governments or government ministers promote what's called a bill, and the bill goes through several iterations of Parliament. And when it goes through, I think it's about 3 cycles between the House of Commons and House of Parliament, that's when it's given royal assent. So the King says, yeah, I'm okay with that. And it becomes an act. So this will eventually become the Property Brackets Digital Assets, etc. Act of 2024, 2025. And in it, it's talking about, basically clearing up definition of what crypto is in terms of, is it a property? And they're saying basically it is. So that will be interesting because
I think this is more of it's more of a clarification of the court cases that went through where people's digital assets were stolen, and you had a couple of different rulings. You had one where it was an asset, so they own the asset, and so the other person had to give it back. And I think you had one that basically said, well, because it's not codified in law, they didn't have to give it back. And then I think it went through to a higher court, which said, oh, yes, it's an asset. And I think basically they were looking for direction from the government to clarify things so that if someone steals your digital asset, you can go to court and you can, well, in theory, get it back. So we had a situation with dogs as well. I think this is kind of, they just rewritten the same law that they did for dogs and pets, because if somebody stole your dog, it wasn't your asset or your property, so there's nothing you could do. So they had to go into court and actually basically codify that and say that, the owner of the dog, it's their property. The dog is the owner's property, or belongs to the owner. So if somebody steals it, then you can go and get your dog back.
There is another side to it as well, just quickly for those who are interested in this whole thing about, so what kind of thing as to whether it's property or not, is that it also now makes it easier to seize by government bodies if they wish to seize your assets, because now it's recognized as property. It can be treated far simpler. So in the UK, there was a law passed last year, and part of it included the ability for the police to seize your crypto assets. And this probably enables it even more now. And the fascinating thing was that the police they had the right to seize your crypto assets if they suspected you of undertaking criminal activities. So it wasn't that they had to prove that you were breaking the law or they had to prove that you were doing criminal stuff. They just had to have suspicion in someone. They could seize the crypto assets and sell them off.
Yeah.
And then
they just well, not sell them. They just brought it in line with the financial regulations. So if the police suspect you were doing something wrong, they can go to your bank account and freeze your account for as long as it takes them to run the investigation.
No, so this was the interesting thing. It wasn't just a freezing order, because they can do that, and that does happen. What they can
actual confiscation,
that they could actually confiscate and sell. So you had the potential of.
So what would happen if you then go to court and you're found innocent?
Then they would return the asset to you.
Well, if they've sold it.
Yeah, and this is where it got really interesting, and this is where I think it's going to need a test case to prove it. Because what happens if someone seizes Bitcoin, for example, and as you say, you're later proven to not be guilty. In fact, they didn't even have to prosecute in order to seize the crypto. But what happened if they did go to court, you won your case, and they'd sold it? They would presumably give you the money back at the point of sale. Now, what happens if the crypto's gone up in price? There's a big exposure there, and that's where it's going to take a few court cases to actually embolden that. So you have this confusing thing in the UK still, that even though you may have a law that is clear and unambiguous and whatever, it still kind of has to be proven at some point by a case going through the courts for you to then have precedents in some way.
Yeah,
So I
has to go through
I think it would go through
to
and
the High
fail.
Court. Yeah, once it gets to the High Court, I think they'll say it's unconstitutional or whatever,
Yeah,
and we'll go back
exactly.
for them to rewrite it properly.
Correct.
But it's kind of, I mean, you've got the US has a kind of similar system with bankruptcy. I mean, I don't know, some of you might have gone through the I don't know, Celsius bankruptcy, and now you've got the FTX bankruptcy and stuff like that. The Celsius bankruptcy, they took everybody's crypto. They then sold everything except ETH and Bitcoin. Anything else you had, they sold it and got a cash value for it. They sold it right at the bottom of the market. So basically, and then they went and bought literally at the top of the market Bitcoin and ETH so that they can then pay back people in Bitcoin and ETH. So effectively, what they did was they just slashed everybody's holdings by about 90% by doing that. But apparently, they had to do that. Whereas with FTX, they're looking to do the same thing. Though FTX, they're saying they want to give people back cash, so they want to be in a position to sell it. And in fact, Galaxy, is it Galaxy Digital, have got the contract, and they're selling. They've already started selling Solana. So, but they've been selling it for quite a while. I think since December or whatever. So Solana was down, it's gone up, and so forth. But they're just consistently selling it. And the thing is, they're saying they're going to give people back cash rather than if a lot of the members or people who were claiming wanted back their crypto, but the committee, which is full of I don't know, hedge funds and the big sort of big holders, say no. But that's because also the basically the person running the bankruptcy, the office, also said no. And what it is these big bankruptcy organizations make a lot of money, and it's just another way of making more money by selling the assets, then buying the assets back, then distributing it, and so forth. It just when you look at it, you're thinking, why are all these little things going on? But if you're billing people 20-30 million a month or something like that, then you're going to try and prolong it as long as possible. Because I think the Celsius bankruptcy, in the end, the legal firms that dealt with it, considering it lasted about a year and a half before they started paying out, they're still paying out. I think it cost something around 400 million, and it still hasn't finished. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm saying
and
it's similar with FTX. It's like, I think I'm just listening to a story at the moment. It's about $1 billion the lawyers made.
Yeah, by the time it finishes.
Yeah.
Because even the FTX, that one started later, so it's in a far earlier state than Celsius. At least Celsius have already given back people their crypto, but they're giving you crypto and they're giving you shares. So they've set up a new.
Ken, I think we've just lost your audio.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You're back.
Okay. Basically, one of the things is with the Celsius, it hasn't finished because they've set up a new entity, because there's this Bitcoin mining entity, I think in Texas, that was owned by Celsius. That is going to be consolidated, and it's going to be floated on the NASDAQ, and the creditors are going to get some shares. And I don't know, this other company that's come in who's going to run it, they're going to get some shares and so forth. So the bleed on the on the creditors' fund is still going on until that element's finished. With FTX, it's a much earlier situation, but I think with FTX, simply because the amount of money was much larger, by the time they finish, it'd probably be $1 billion or 2 billion, rather than $500 million for sales.
It's a classic thing that no criticism to lawyers. However, whenever there's a dispute, it's always the lawyers who make the money either way.
The other thing about FTX is that something that they didn't publicize is that there were some hacks where they lost. It's estimated about $1 billion. I think definitely one was about 400 million. Someone exploited gaps in their algorithms, etc., managed to sort of somehow front run their own trading algos, and exploited a few loops. So there were some high profile losses, about 1 billion, I think it's estimated, but they didn't disclose them because they didn't want to obviously people start a panic.
I think there's some concern there as well as to was there some sort of insider trading going on
Possibly,
in terms of that.
Well, with FTX, it's like MB said, they did have an exploit which they basically didn't tell anybody about and try to cover it up. Mm-hmm. Then you had the situation with CZ where he basically went and literally said he's going to dump their tokens. That went down. Then you have the Luna collapse. They had a lot of exposure to Luna, so I think they're like 300 million on that as well. And then the worst thing. I mean, some of those you could say are basically business, just things going wrong in business. But for me, the problem with the FTX thing was the front running of their own customers. So their trading arm, their so-called trading arm, and their so-called geniuses. They were only geniuses because they had basically written the code in such a way that they would never lose money. So they would basically front running their customers, and whenever they made a loss, they would just dip into the FTX customer treasury, take it out, plug their hole, and continue. So not only were they front running their customers, they were using their customers' money to trade, yet under their terms and conditions of the exchange was they were never going to use that money for anything to trade or anything, but they were passing it along Alameda Capital, who were then using it.
And this is where it actually comes back to Gio's point about regulation, because if you've got proper regulation in place around things like segregation of client funds, which appears to have been one of the many problems of FTX, then that would reduce that risk. So yeah, interesting.
I think some of this actually, if you listen to the FTX story, some of these kind of gaping holes, like not having proper client segregated funds, was the fact that Sam Bankman-Fried was one of these sort of characters who was almost detached from reality. So he's kind of like these geniuses who don't go by the rules. So a normal person, if they're setting up a fund, they would say, well, the first thing I need to do is hire a CFO, right? But they didn't have a CFO, and the actual organizational structure of FTX was a complete mess. And a lot of people were hired who were very good, but they didn't really know what they were doing, and they just there was this huge element of randomness. And I think obviously in the end, that's what brought them down, that there wasn't that proper structure in place.
I think the other thing is it brings to mind that if you look at the cover of Time magazine, and getting onto the cover of Time magazine seems to be the ultimate thing for people. If you take a look at how many people have been on the cover of Time magazine and have subsequently ended up in jail or bankrupt or both, it's almost that there's a pretty high correlation there. So it's interesting. People always say, "Oh, what should you be careful about when you're looking at like company prospectuses and that." I always think, has your CEO been on the cover of Time magazine? Because if so, be very careful. But that's a kind of a cynical view. I just wanted to change you a little bit. Arnold, coming back to your kind of area of interest around digital identity and that. Yeah. Is that a particular area you're actually working on? Or is that just an area of interest then?
So I have some friends that are ex Consensus. Was their specialty team. It was called, I forget what it was called actually, but they had a core team there that was focused on ID, and then they broke out and they started a new group called Spruce. They went through YC, and they're doing quite well. So I've just been looking at them, known them since like 2018 when I was with Pillar, and it's kind of a similar, idea of that data lock or idea of or vault, owning your own data and bringing it back to controlling your keys and your information, rather than pushing it out like, that old David Siegel idea of pushing it out to 100 different iterations of yourself. So I don't know, I find it interesting.
So are you a developer or?
No, I was business development
okay.
at Pillar, and just been doing other things since and advising different outfits in the DeFi space. And I particularly like the decentralized physical infrastructure space. I think there's a lot of potential there, and obviously a lot of money. There's a group called Fuse down there at level 39 that I like. They're doing it right, I think. So they're looking at the States. The UK is, UK is a funny market, whereas in the US you have the Inflation Reduction Act that backstops or supports these investments. So a lot of potential there, I think.
Because I guess Pillar again, because they were kind of like paving the way for a while with digital wallets early on, and some things
Yeah.
they were doing. As you say, David Siegel certainly had a certain vision in one direction, which may not have been aligned with that of others, shall we say?
Well, it was an interesting experiment or set of experiments, but when a startup suddenly raises $21 million, off the back of a white paper,
Yep.
it was probably a great paper at the time, but it was an interesting approach, and yeah, they started with a wallet, and they're still going. So
yeah. I used to
Yeah,
bump
that's,
into I used to bump into some of the people, yourself included, I think.
yeah,
Sometimes in London. So yeah, that was always good fun. Cool, excellent. Right.
yeah,
So
exactly.
so
we,
with the digital stuff with Pillar, they kind of I reckon they lost their focus because when they did start, it was really focused on the decentralized digital infrastructure.
Hmm.
But then I think they then took some money from the treasury and set up a venture fund, basically, didn't they? They took it, set up this venture fund, and some of the, what I initially considered as the initial founders and initial brains behind the initial project moved into the venture fund. And
Yep.
unfortunately, that meant the focus on Pillar kind of waned a little bit. But it was, like I said, I mean, I think it was a fantastic project myself, but
Yeah, it's
unfortunately, it
probably
didn't work.
true. And I think it was kind of the anti-Facebook idea of owning your own data and controlling that, and that's still valid, I think.
all I know is I've still got my Pillar T-shirt, which is what is it, indistinguishable from magic? I think it was.
Oh, there it is.
So,
Yeah. Oh, I got somebody at the door. I'll be right back.
no worries. Okay. So
I had Pillar tokens, and I don't even know what happened to them.
Oh
Some
wow.
migrations of laptops and phones, and at some point you just can't find bloody wallets, right? So I know that I still have some. I recently liquidated basically everything but Bitcoin, because we had enough of a lift on everything that I was positive, and I'm not really interested in any of it anymore. So, but
I, I'm I was going to say, Eric, I think there's a lot of people who are like that, who have either been given airdrops or they've made small investments or they've done whatever, and they've ended up with this obscure wallet with an
yeah,
obscure address, and they can't
yeah.
remember the password or the
And
keys.
there were all these tokens who didn't even have a wallet, and you had to hold them on some exchange. And well, you know where that goes, right?
Mm.
Which
I,
actually kind of comes back to the discussion that we were having earlier about confiscations. I kind of take a somewhat orthogonal view to all of that, because the only way that they can actually confiscate is if they have the private key, or if you don't hold your own funds, in other words, right? And there's really very little reason to ever give your tokens to any company,
mm.
given the fact that we have DeFi now.
Oh, I was going to say, aside from DeFi, though, there is still another way that they can confiscate the tokens, and I know this has happened sometimes, which is where if you can get a court order, which the big exchanges will accept and recognize, then they can either blacklist your wallet or they can issue a seizure on them. So I believe
Well,
there have been some cases there.
if you have a wallet with an exchange,
Yeah,
if you don't, it's not your private keys, it's not your Bitcoin, right?
yeah.
That's the basic rule. So don't leave things on exchanges, and in fact, don't even do business with exchanges that are actual companies.
And that was the conversation I had with someone the other day. So we were agreed on what you're saying of like don't hold your crypto on an exchange.
Yeah,
However, you can still have a situation where someone chooses to go through a centralized exchange, one that complies with the regulation, and you might try and do a trade in some way. And that's at the point at which you can potentially suffer a seizure.
Yeah, and that's why you don't do that, right? I mean,
Yep.
just find a DEX or find some kind of decentralized solution like what is that thing, Rune, I think it's called, or whatever, Thorchain.
Thorchain, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And as always, if anyone's watching this, this is not recommendations on how to avoid things, but
Yeah, I mean,
But the way
the thing is that you still have an on-ramp problem, but you solve the on-ramp problem with something like Circle, right? So, or you just buy into USDT or something through a centralized exchange, and so you just have that sort of fractional area of risk.
okay.
Yeah,
Certainly,
but with the way, I think the way the authorities deal with the way they are dealing with decentralized finance at the moment, it's you can see how they deal with it, with the North Koreans who go around hacking people. So what they basically do is they get the wallet and just use something like chain analysis, and they just follow the token around. So once the token hits a centralized entity, that's it. It's on a list. It'll be blocked. The other thing they do is they what they did. I can't remember the name of the app, but they can just basically take the address and they can add it onto the sanctions list.
mm-hmm.
So anybody dealing with an OFAC compliant thing will not accept anything from that specific address. So that's how they are getting that around it.
Well,
So
I put together a proof of concept a few months ago using the Nomada network, which I think it's gone live by now. And it essentially allows you to do shielded transactions, right? So I didn't have a whole app around it. It was just a proof of concept, but it works. And it means that you can now basically create mirror tokens on Cosmos from any other blockchain and then swap them on Osmosis for basically anything else. And these transactions are shielded, so they have zero idea where they went or where they came out at the other end. So in other words,
is that almost like using like the equivalent of a Tumblr or like Zcash or something then, in effect?
It's actually Zcash technology.
Okay.
So the Nomada guys went to Electric Coin Company and they said, look, you guys have really cool tech and you've got your coin that's gone absolutely nowhere because the exchanges won't carry it and all this other kind of stuff. So can we license it? Can you bring it over? And then we want to basically create the channels that would make the technology shield any token, not just Zcash, right? And they said, yeah, actually that makes a great deal of sense. They collaborated and now it's there, right?
Nice.
So, and because it's part of Cosmos, then that means that you're integrated into all of the other cool projects. So that's kind of the direction that I'm going in.
As long as it basically, it's like when Tornado Cash started. It was brilliant. Everybody was using it. The problem came when the foreign entities that the governments really hate started using it, and then that's when the problem came for Tornado Cash. And as you know, the two developers now are sitting in a jail in Holland.
Yeah, but they can't do that with Cosmos, right? Because most of this stuff is published open source anonymously anyway. So you have no idea. It's a contract and you can't put a horse on the donkey.
Well, so is Tornado Cash. I mean, I've still got my private keys, but there's no way I'm going to take my ETH out from there because until something happens, because at the moment it's on OFAC lists if you interact with it. A lot of people, I think, how much is that? There's about 500 million or even more still sitting in worth of ETH is because people are just looking at it and thinking, well, no, because it's totally decentralized and there's nothing that developers could do. But what the authorities are doing is they're sending out a message. But like you say, it's an anonymous developers with regards to
yeah. So if you think about the fact that Cosmos now connects to about 31 EVMs, and that means that value can flow from any of those EVMs into Cosmos, use shielded transactions to move around inside of Cosmos, and then come out at some other EVM. then what? They're gonna just basically block everything? I mean, they could.
No, I mean,
Okay,
what I'm saying is this is, yeah, those shielded, you can follow the transactions. And when it comes out on the other end, let's say it goes into a central exchange, you can then you use chain analysis. And
yeah, but that's the
it also
point. Is
depends on
chain
how long.
analysis? Chain analysis can't follow shielded transactions, right? Because that's the whole point.
That's where it's going to be interesting.
I,
That
I thought sorry, can I just ask one more question with regards to shielded transactions?
Mhm.
Because doesn't Monero use the same technology?
No, no.
It doesn't.
Zcash and Monero operate differently, and Zcash is truly zero knowledge, right? So it's impossible for chain analysis or any of these chain analysis companies to follow the trail because there is no trail.
Can I just
Because I
ask
know
one thing? Sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking at something. I was looking at something today. We're a developer, and I'm following a lot of his material. Um, but this guy, he's done a lot of programming stuff on building sort of trading algos. But this particular tutorial is on setting up your own node. So he's looked at sort of, for example, finance, which is prohibitively expensive. Well, it might not be depending on your budget, but he's doing a sort of a follow through of Uniswap and showing how you can look at Uniswap transactions and possibly potentially that could be used, for example, to front run. So when you see something like Pepe Coin, I think some time back skyrocketed in price, and so if you had a node set up and you were following the transactions, you could potentially jump in at that point. But obviously, with what's being said, I didn't follow the full thread, but I get the idea that if these transactions are shielded, then that kind of trading would be harder to do because obviously you couldn't follow the transactions. Am I correct
Yeah,
in saying that?
yes, you're correct, but it's not quite accurate. There's a distinction there between what is a private transaction and a shielded transaction. So you can front run when you know as a node when you have access um, to the transactions in your mempool, right? You could create transactions that aren't available to the node in the mempool, but that ultimately get written down on the blockchain and are therefore visible to the world. Shielded transactions never get written to the blockchain, right? Which means to say they're not available in the mempool, so you can't front run them, and you also can't trace. You don't know who sent what to whom or when. You really don't know nothing about the transaction. It just doesn't exist.
Right. Okay. Well, is it possible that most transactions would move that way or not?
Well, so the interesting thing is that they have this technology called Path. I think it's called Cosmos Path, which essentially allows connectivity to a whole bunch of other blockchains and therefore allows any asset to fall into Cosmos, therefore be able to be wrapped in a shield and sent somewhere else and then pop up even back in the same EVM without being able to make any connection between the two.
Yeah, yeah. So if that happens, let's say in theory, let's say that happened with every single transaction, then that kind of following transactions and trying to front run, you just wouldn't be able to do it. If all transactions, I don't know what percentage of transactions that happen at the moment on different blockchains follow this method. I assume it's still relatively small, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's so Namada is not even mainnet yet.
I was going to say I was just checking out the Cosmos
Yeah,
website.
search for Namada,
Is
N
it
M
Nomada?
A, yeah, NAMADA.
So it's a Cosmos blockchain, yeah? Or built on,
Yes, yeah.
yeah?
hmm
I'll have a dig around for that while you're chatting then. Okay, cool.
Blockchain. It sounds very interesting. The
Well,
Nomada blockchain.
it works. I know because I've built a proof of concept on it. And so now it's just a question of how do you integrate it into wallets. So I've been spending a little time with Wallet Connect these days, and your development kit. Yeah, there you go.
Namada.
Because that's kind of the second phase of it. How do I build an actual mobile app that can interact with Namada?
So is this it's .NET? So is it based on C#?
It's actually Rust.
Rust. Okay.
Yeah.
It's launching soon. Okay, so it hasn't launched.
So what's really cool, Gary, is that if we get this technology to work, then you should be able to take probably any asset on any EVM, ship it to Cosmos, swap it for $V on Osmosis, and then go spend it at a store.
Wow. It's quite impressive then.
Yeah, it looks very impressive.
Yeah,
Definitely want to check out then. So Namada.
their code is fairly robust. It took me a month to get through their demos and stuff, their their walkthroughs, because the docs were old and whatever. But the community was fairly present enough that I could figure it out, and then I have all the code that works.
Okay. Not been much appearing in the press releases of late. That's interesting. I was hoping to see something about it going live or something. So, well, okay, definitely something for people to go off and read up and learn a little bit more about. Thanks for that, Eric.
Yeah.
It does look
Also,
interesting. Yeah.
Secret. You should look into Secret.network. They're the ones who have the secret path, which is the connectoid to the EVMs. So Axelar has actually done a whole bunch of work to allow tokens and messages to go from EVM to EVM. And then they now have a connection to Secret Path, which allows all of the EVMs essentially to connect to Cosmos. And Axelar is a much more mature project as well.
So it's going to be acting basically as a bridge from EVM to Cosmos, or a secure bridge.
Yeah, but it's decentralized.
Yeah.
So no one
That's the
holds your
problem.
tokens.
Yeah, the problem with bridges, you have, the way they work normally is you've got that issue of somebody holding the private keys to the bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
And this gets rid of it.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Nice.
Can any of this stuff be exploited from a trading point of view, or would it make trading harder because the transactions are less visible?
It's kind of orthogonal, the question to the subject matter, right? I mean, there are liquidity pools on these platforms like Osmosis, and so so all kinds of people are bridging all kinds of tokens to have one central sort of trading hub. It's in the works, but it'll eventually happen. And so maybe trading, you could say, will be enhanced by the fact that you can go to a single place and there's just basically everything that you ever wanted, including the ability to bring your own stuff into it, right? So if there's some token that isn't already there, you can bring it.
Right. Okay.
I guess Manny's asking the question from a point of view of can you see trading transactions transparently so that you can see what everyone's up to?
Generally on Osmosis you can do that because Namada is just a transport layer, right? So you can use, in fact, one of I had 5 proofs of concept that I wanted to do, and I got through about 4 of them. The 5th one was to do a shielded transaction against Osmosis so that you can do shielded trading. It's theoretically possible, but it was difficult to implement, and I didn't find enough support to figure it out. And I will go back to it at some point.
Right. Okay.
But by default, the transactions on Osmosis are not secret.
So I guess did I have that about right, Manny? That you're thinking in terms of does this effectively provide almost like a dark pool type capability where you can't see what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I
Which
guess I was the question I had, and I think that was answered by Eric, is that the transactions on osmosis are transparent, but it's the bridges in between where people can sort of jump into osmosis and out of osmosis, and that there's a shielding in terms of what they're doing on the other end of sort of each side of that. So they might use osmosis as a kind of middle layer, but then they're kind of jumping around between different EVMs, and that those transactions are shielded. So that maybe that element of it
Well,
is
those transactions may be shielded,
right.
right?
Okay.
So at present, nothing is really shielded unless you want it to be.
Okay.
So can I just ask? So essentially, you could maybe take an ERC20 from, let's say, Ethereum, for example. You then transfer it to us using Nomad. So then it's shielded. And then you can then bridge it back to ETH on a different wallet. But because it's now becomes unshielded, it won't have a direct connection to the original wallet that you sent the ETH
That's
into Nomad.
that's correct. It's impossible to determine that it's the same funds, that there's any connection between them.
Wouldn't that make
Interesting.
criminal activity easier as well?
Sure.
Not that I'm thinking of that exploiting it financially in that
Yep.
in that respect. I just had the thought that it would actually that's a kind of an open season for
and
Well, but it's also not a particularly meaningful question, right? Because what does illegal mean? That's a big nebulous cloud. Illegal is anything that any government decides to make illegal at any point, and they can change their minds at any point. So it's like that's not really a criterion to guide your system design. It's like sure, anything can be used for illegal activities, including the US dollar. So totally not a consideration.
but it is.
Become a valid.
I was
So
going
I
to
was just
say,
going to say, I'm looking at the documents. You don't need a powerful PC to become a validator on it. It's to run a node basically as a validator. The hardware requirements are not that that hard. It's actually quite lightweight.
Mhm.
I wonder if the idea of that is to encourage a growth in the network then, because obviously the thing with these kind of capabilities is that the more nodes you have, the more secure it becomes, or that's the kind of thinking. Although that didn't quite work out with Tool,
Yeah,
which is
actually, with Namada, the greater the number of assets that come into the shared pool, the greater the security.
Mhm. I guess it's like the bigger the swimming pool, the less you can figure out who's put the specific
Yes,
drink
that's
water
exactly
in it.
it.
Or yep.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
avoiding using certain of the liquids there, but yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a really fascinating area. I think there's going to be continued growth in it. The challenge is, as Manny alluded to, that as soon as you start talking about capabilities which provide privacy, which obfuscate transactions, all this kind of thing. Whilst I totally take on board Eric's point about that doesn't present what you're designing or what you're developing. The reality is, as soon as that touches the fiat world, this is where we start having regulation and legislation, and this is where we start getting the aggro of oh, crypto, that's just used for illegal money laundering, blah 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 type
Yeah,
thing.
but you know what? The horse has left the barn, right?
Yep.
I mean, after the creation of zero knowledge protocols, zero knowledge proofs, um, okay, fine. They can create all the regulation that they want, but they can't enforce it, right? What's the point of having laws on the book if you can't do anything about it?
Yep. And that's where it's going to be interesting because it's about enforceability, and also proportionality. This is the other thing when you look about the laws and that they need to be enforceable. You need to have the capability to enforce it as well,
Hmm.
and the kind of the punitive response as to a fine or whatever needs to be relatively proportionate to make it worthwhile for you to prosecute now. And I think we're in uncharted territories in some way around some of this.
Well,
So,
look, I mean, governments are chasing X because X wants censor information, right? And that's a centralized system. Now imagine what they what their position is going to be when they're dealing with something which is so amorphous as a decentralized network. Nobody runs it. I mean, there is no head, there's no core developers, there's no one that you can, there's no CEO, right? So they're going to write a cease and desist letter to whom exactly?
although it was interesting a while ago, a law firm in the UK was actually able to issue a legal notice against an unknown entity, which I think they did it by posting it onto the blockchain or onto a blockchain. It's quite funny because it was quite a nebulous concept of normally when you issue a notice against an individual or a legal entity in some way, it has to be a known type thing.
Yeah, but wasn't that just a marketing thing? Because if you issue a notice, is just basically saying turn up. But if you issue it to nobody, nobody turns up.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So you may be right. It might have been a law firm that was just trying to pull a bit of free publicity in some way. But I think it was recognised because this is the whole thing that when you serve notice against a person or an entity, you normally have to prove that you've done it in some way. And I think they were arguing that with
Yeah,
it being on
there's a service issue, and in the US, for example, you can, if you can't find the person, so there's a corporation and there's at least an agent at any point in time, right? So a person that is registered with the state where the corporation was created, whose sole purpose is to receive communications of some kind. So, but you might not be able to find that person, right? In that case, you can actually publish in a local newspaper your intent to sue, and you can show up to court with that document, and the
They
judge
did
will
that to
consider it.
they did that to what's his name? The guy who did uh, he did Pulse Chain. What's his name? The founder of Pulse Chain. So they couldn't serve him because he was all over the place. And then they worked out he was in Finland. And every time they went to the address, he wasn't there. So they just served it to the local police station. And that's
Yeah. I think this is where it comes back to what we were saying before about, and Eric used the phrase, I think, of the horse is already bolted. That when you look at decentralized capabilities, and whether that's DeFi or whether it's DePIN or any other D type thing, the legislation and the regulation are always going to be spending time playing catch up because technology moves faster than legislation, definitely.
Well, the problem is the whole of law is built around the concept of human beings, and potentially associations of human beings as corporations or things like that, right? So you always have a person who is responsible for doing something, and you have to go find him and pin him down. But that becomes basically impossible. You know, I can write some code and publish it on GitHub under some fake email account and use the GitHub mechanisms to actually auto build and publish to some blockchain. And there's no way they can ever figure out who to hold responsible.
But could they not track your IP address, for example, of the person who posted
No, you
it?
can use a
VPN,
yeah. That's called air gapping, right? And if you're going to do something that is interesting enough, you air gap.
One thing I've just seen that I've Googled becoming a crypto lawyer and something actually came up. You know, so it's a new profession for kids just coming out of college.
There's definitely a real growth opportunity there. There's certainly a thing. And I know in the past I've done some work with lawyers who are saying, well, you know, is emerging technology threatening our profession? And I was saying, no, if anything, it's just creating even more opportunities. So That'll be it, folks. We're going to have to close off, I'm afraid, because we're coming on the hour. But it's a really interesting conversation around the whole. It's funny, we started off around digital identity again, really, in some ways, but the whole obfuscation of transactions and not making things transparent or not type thing. So thanks everyone for the contributions, Eric. As always, very much appreciate your thoughts on that. Ken, Manny, Gio, I hope you found that worthwhile coming along and listening in to some of the perspectives. To everyone, Arnold still is answering the door, so
Yeah.
it was nice to see him coming along anyway. But folks, be safe. Don't hold your keys on an exchange, and have a great day. See you around.
Thanks very much,
guys.
all. Thank you.